Okay, please unmute yourself and we do the pledge. Okay, I pledge my allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic which it stands,
one nation
under God, indivisible, with liberty
and justice
for all. And a thought for this morning, and words I thought I would never say. Our thought of the day comes from former heavyweight boxing champion Ken Norton, who said, "Of all the titles I've been privileged to have, Dad has been the best."
Oh, wow. Good.
Let's have a meeting.
Thanks.
That's great.
Oh, I'm going to run the meeting, I guess.
Yeah.
And there's really not that much to do. Well, first of all, Vonda Rodgers, again, we welcome you. You're going to get a formal introduction from our friend Joe Michalecki very shortly before we hear from you. But we appreciate you. We give you a virtual hug, and we are just so pleased that you were able to join us this morning, and so thankful for you taking this early morning time. Any reports today? Joe, I know you have something to say about Rotary International, probably.
Nothing prepared. I will say we have one more formal meeting with our illustrious president, Ken Oda. So once you've got this meeting under your belt, Ken, you've got, we hope you show up next week on the 25th, because I don't want to run the meeting. We'll maybe make Dan do it if you don't show. But anyway, I just wanted to say thanks to Ken, and we have a little something for you when we're actually able to meet all together again. So
thank you so much.
You can't imagine what that might be, I'm sure. But anyway, it's ready for when we're able to get together. And
Yay.
As to when we can all get together again, I don't know that any of us really know. I know the board's been talking, and Doubletree will advise us as to when it's potentially possible to come back. So kind of hold off at the time being. You've probably seen pushes in your email from Rotary International about foundation giving. You've seen enough from me. I don't need to say any more. If you're able to, great. Any questions, holler. Let's see. Oh, President-elect training. I will mention something. Both Rick and I have been working last 3 Saturday mornings with a virtual president-elect, what do you call it, president effectiveness training. Right before the Zoom call, I did a quick survey about our satisfaction in conducting or participating in this Zoom type of training. And I think we had as many as 47 people on the call, if I remember right. It's a pretty good number of folks for the last 3 Saturdays, running from 1.5 hours to 2.5 hours. And I was an opportunity to interact with various club presidents, president-elects, and kind of be trained virtually as opposed to in person in Effingham as we would have normally done. So plug for the International Convention, which is online starting Saturday. Sign up for that. If you're able to, there's some good breakouts that I sent out last week. An opportunity to take that in and participate with a lot of other people throughout the world. So trying to think what else. This is where I better writing stuff down.
Yeah, speaking of the next leadership, there's a virtual installation of the next leadership on the 28th. That's Sunday at 5 p.m. to 7. So anybody can join this time. You don't have to pay any fee for this one. So that's a good opportunity. So you all can join for the installation of the new governor, district governor, and also the new president. So.
Joe, I'm curious, the president-elect online virtual training, in your experience, was the attendance better for that or not as good or about the same as face-to-face?
It's a very good question. And a lot of people have adapted to Zoom meetings, and we were getting about, when we met in Effingham, we'd probably get half of the club presidents that actually showed up. So I would guess we probably did a little better.
Yeah, that's been my experience.
Mm-hmm. But not
lesson. If we can take one lesson away from this nonsense, that may be use this technology.
Oh, and moving forward, that's something we need to consider as well, as there'll people to join us in person, those that may not feel comfortable doing so. And if you're traveling, say Kurt runs up to Wisconsin, Dan, you run to New Jersey or somewhere. Why not pop in electronically? And that might be
Right.
some way for Diva to continue her membership, for instance,
Right.
when she transitions to St. Louis. So,
And if we can set up an iPad on a
tripod or something.
book stand
Mhm.
or something, so that people can participate.
Yep. I know Sunset does that with a simple cell phone and broadcasts on either Facebook Live or something, and
That's correct. Yeah.
they have members participate that way.
The difference being with the Zoom or the Google meetings, or then there is some interaction, there is some involvement of the remote person, whereas a Facebook Live is just like watching TV.
Yep.
Okay. Anybody else? Barb, you have anything? No update? Nope.
The only thing I've got is if you guys want to do something Saturday evening, it's free. It's the McLean County Relay for Life. It's going to be very, very different. It's at 6 to a little later at Heartland Community, and it's drive-through. There'll be luminaries,
Wow.
music,
Okay.
and it's just for that evening.
That's great to know. That's great to know. Thank you. Okay, anybody else? Before, here's Kelly coming on. Maybe we'll wait for her to join and give her a hard time, but since we have a couple seconds before I hand it
Good
off.
morning.
Good
Morning,
morning.
Kelly.
Hey, Kelly.
Morning, Kelly.
Morning.
You want to toss a late happy buck in the hat? Are you happy just to be here?
I'm happy just to be up this morning. How's
Yeah.
that?
Awesome.
Good.
All right. I think we're last call. Anything else? Okay, I'm going to mute myself, and I'm going to turn it over to Joe Michalecki, who's going to introduce our speaker.
Fabulous. Good morning, all. And we have a rather special guest. We've had the opportunity to have a few guests. We've missed a few guests because of activities going on. And Vonda come to us from a recommendation, actually, by Susie Tongate, Rotarian in Gibson City. She's also a city council member. And Susie has heard Vonda, knows her and her family, and a little of the background that it's nice when you can be suggested a speaker and you hit up the speaker for a bio in advance. Dan does a great job at introducing people because he knows all folks, and Vonda provided one. So I'm going to just read this. So pardon my reading out loud, but it does a better job than I can come up with digging into research.
Hi, Diva. Sorry, Joe.
Diva's with us. Yay, on the beach.
Good morning.
Morning, Diva.
Morning, Diva.
You heard us talking about you, didn't you? So that's why you're joining us now.
No, I had started furiously packing and then I lost track of time. And then I came.
Great to have you. Great to have you. Introducing our speaker. So Vonda was born and raised in Gibson City. Parents are Russ and Diana Coulter, active members of the Gibson City Bible Church. Vonda and her husband Kevin live in Bloomington with their children and granddaughter. Vonda's here today to honor her son, Army Ranger Sergeant Josh Rodgers. Josh was killed in action on April 27th, 2017, while conducting combat operations in Afghanistan. Sergeant Rodgers was a Ranger team leader assigned to Company C, 3rd Battalion, 75th Ranger Regiment at Fort Benning, Georgia. In addition to multiple national monuments, Josh is honored locally with the renaming of the Normal Post Office and the dedication of Airport Road in Bloomington. The area where he was laid to rest is now known as the U.S. Army Ranger Sergeant Joshua P. Rodgers Veterans Field at Evergreen Memorial Cemetery. And with that, I give you Vonda. Vonda, you've got 20, 30 minutes, whatever you'd like to take. And thank you again very much for joining us this morning and sharing your story.
Thank you very much. Everyone hear me okay?
Yes.
All right. So a couple things, you always write your bio and then you go, oh, I probably should have mentioned. So a couple things I probably should have mentioned. My family goes to Eastview Christian Church. So I may know a few of you from there, although we haven't been in the building for a while. So, and then my husband, Kevin, my daughter, Emily, and I all work at State Farm. So we've been in Bloomington. We moved we moved from Gibson City up to Minnesota for about a year and a half, and came back to Bloomington. All my kids went through the Unified School District. We were up in Minnesota when 9/11 happened, and so Josh would have been in second grade when that happened, and it made a huge impact on his life. He talked about being in the Army. He would dress up in the camo clothes and, lay out in the front yard, and he was convinced no one could see him. So that was pretty much Army and sports consumed his life. Our younger daughter was about the same. She also was into sports, actually played soccer at ISU. My oldest daughter was in band at Normal Community and also went to ISU. So we're pretty much as deep set in this community as you can be. Our youngest son is just headed to Kingsley Junior High next year, granddaughter at North Point. So Josh played Army his whole life, played sports, and when he got into high school, made it pretty clear that he wanted to go into the Army, and fully supported that. His dad and I both agreed that was probably the best thing, because we couldn't see ourselves honestly paying for college for Josh, because it would have been one big party. Josh, if you knew Josh in high school, you probably would not have used the word hero to describe him. You certainly would have used the words fierce friend. Never started a fight, but never walked away from one, especially if it was protecting someone he loved, which the more and more that I've met military people, people who have served or serving, that's what it's all about. It's about protecting the people behind you. So before I get started, I'd love to know how many veterans we have on the call. Anyone that's served? All right. Behind me, this is Josh up here, which you can probably barely see him, but that's Josh. And this is the flag that was carried actually on one of the last missions that he was on. Not the last, but one of the last. It's actually signed with the guys, by the guys that he served with. They commonly do that, carry a flag with them every time they go out on a mission, and often sign them so that they'll have memory of that deployment. Josh graduated high school in 2013 and went straight into the Army, had a summer of play before he went into basic training in August and celebrated his 19th birthday in the Army. Went through basics in 13, did airborne school and ranger assessment program in 14, did ranger school in 15, and by 2017, came home and hugged us in January 2017, and he was off to Afghanistan on his third deployment in Afghanistan. He'd also been to Australia for a training deployment. He'd been to England for a training deployment, and then several training deployments within the United States. So they're busy. They work a lot, and we watched Josh from what I would call a warrior without a war when he was in high school to someone who had truly found his place. He was living his dream as an Army Ranger, and he was, I believe, bringing out the purpose of his life in protecting our freedoms. Now, I didn't know, so some things I didn't know and some things that maybe you don't know. So in the Special Forces within the Army, so 1% of our youth volunteer to join the Army, and then 1% of that volunteer to join a special operations group. And what that means is they have more training, considerable more training, and they are typically, right now anyway, serving front lines. So the U.S. Rangers is the Army Infantry Special Operations Group. On each of Josh's deployments, he'd been in combat zones, and it really, what I know now that I didn't know then, was it was kind of just like the movies. So the night he was killed, they went into the Nangarhar region of Afghanistan. And if you think back to 2017, we had a brand new president, and we dropped what was known as the mother of all bombs. Moab, if you remember back to 2017. And what they were doing was they were clearing out that region where the Afghanistan and Pakistan border, because it had become kind of a hot for ISIS-K, for the leaders of the ISIS-K group, which really, at that time and still today, are among the most just simply evil people in the world. And so they dropped this bomb, which I didn't know, but before they drop a bomb or things like that, they actually drop a warning to everybody in that area. And so weeks before, they had been notifying the people that live there that they needed to leave. So they dropped this bomb. In theory, that cleared out the space. And then just weeks later, the ISIS-K regime had taken over a space there along the Pakistan border. And Josh and the people that he worked with went in that night to basically eliminate the leaders of the ISIS-K. They went in 3 helicopters, so it was U.S. and it was some Afghan forces, so because they're joint forces. And they took in 3 helicopters. They went in just after midnight on what they call ideal conditions. So clear, but pitch black. Clear as in no rain, but heavy cloud coverage because pitch black. And so it turned out that 2 of the helicopters landed and the men got in place, and the helicopter Josh was on was unable to land. And so they had to fast rope out. Again, just like the movies, they dropped the rope and they were dropping 12 to 15 feet, depending on helicopters rocking to avoid fire. And so they dropped in under direct fire from all directions. So what it was it's a very mountainous region there. And so they were dropping into a valley, and it appears that there had been some warning that they were coming that night. And so they were under fire immediately from all directions. Josh was actually the last person off, and he was a team lead at the time. So he had a team of 4 men. So last off the helicopter dropped down. Now, for a mama's heart, a couple things happened that make me feel better, I guess you could say, about that night. One was the team lead, he knew the plan, and he had the opportunity to push back on the plan. But after talking to the other team leads and the other people in leadership, it was solid. And so it was a little off because they had to fast rope in. So they weren't coming in exactly where they thought they'd be. They were a bit off. Now they dropped down, and at that point, they could have called off. That helicopter could have said, it's too dangerous to drop, but they decided to go ahead and drop. So that's yet another decision that he made to intentionally go into that space. The third decision that he made was actually after he dropped and they began running into space, Josh was shot in the leg. These are everybody I think that he was with is under the age of 30. And so these are young men, all men in the Ranger community. They have a few women now, but they haven't yet gone into combat zones. And so these are tough guys. Drops in, and one of his team lead peers said, just kind of on the radio, "Holy shit, I think I've been shot." And the response back was, "I don't know how you don't know, but tie a tourniquet and let's go." And that's exactly what he did. So he'd been shot in the leg. It passed through one leg, went in the other leg. He tied a tourniquet and kept going. And so I picture this as a bit of a movie scene at this point in time. One of the guys described it as if you were standing on the 50-yard line during the Super Bowl and you looked around and you would see all the phones, so all the lights. They described that is what it looked like. That's how many gunshots, if it seemed to be being fired from around them. They went a little further, and Josh and Sergeant Cameron Thomas and Lieutenant and one of the lieutenants was shot. Josh was shot in the head and killed immediately. Cameron was shot in the face and died before getting on the helicopter for the 911 call. And then Daniel actually was shot in the head, but his helmet caught the bullet. He was knocked out, but later regained consciousness, and he actually stayed with the mission and went forward. It was a successful mission, and got the people that they intended to go in and get. Now, if you read about it, or if you remember back to 2017, it was declared friendly fire. What that means was Josh and Cameron were both killed by a U.S. by one of our own guys. They actually got between the good guys and the bad guys as they were going into place because they landed in the wrong spot. They didn't land in the wrong spot. They dropped to a different place than they planned on. So a couple things that have happened since then, and a couple things that we've really given a lot of prayer to. The first one was, and people ask, so what about friendly fire? How do you feel about that? And immediately, when we talked to the vice president, when we talked to, the chairman of the Army, chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, all these people we've spoken to about that night, and God has really just settled our hearts on that. It was war. I think that's something that most Americans don't know or understand, is we're at war against the evil of the world, not necessarily against the countries, and there is some of that happening. We have active military in over 150 countries around the world. Some is against political states, and some is against just pure evil, like things like ISIS-K. It was war. Josh and Cameron both certainly died as a result of war. I feel confident that Josh was living out his purpose in life, and I have begged God to now use me for His purpose, or for what God needs me to do. I share Josh's story for a couple of reasons. One, to remind people that that our active military is serving around the world to protect our freedom, and not freedom to do whatever we want, but freedom to lift each other up in the right way, freedom to make the right choices. What's happening in the world today is particularly the protests and the advancing our country, whether it be through racial biases or through the LGBTQ community or those kinds of things. Those are freedoms that certainly Josh died for. The looting, the other things that are happening, that's just wrong. And so we just won't get into that. But I do believe that those freedoms in our country are just critically important. I really believe that God has placed me in this space to remind people that death did not win, that we know Josh is in heaven. We believe that as Christians, and not to push anyone or any other religions away, but to remind people that that's our beliefs, confirmed because God has given us so many gifts through this. But one of the gifts that He gave us was, before Josh went on deployment, remember I said he came home in January to hug our necks before they left. He sat down with his grandma, who was feeling very uneasy about his deployment, and his words to her were, "Grandma, if anything happens, I will see you in heaven one day." And certainly that's been a gift to us. I also share this message because we've actually had more people die since 9/11 through suicide than in combat battles. This is a real issue for our country and certainly for our military. And so I really believe that in sharing Josh's death, the story of his death and the story of our survival through his death, that we help some of our servicemen and women who have gone through this have the opportunity to speak about it. And so through that, I'm a member of just a few communities that I would just like to introduce you to. And one is called TAPS, TAPS. TAPS is this amazing organization that helps Gold Star families and military work through military deaths. They're just an amazing community. And I'm a mentor in that community now. So I help other mothers who have had a child die through a military-related incident. Thankfully, we don't have any combat deaths anymore. Praise God on that. And so, for example, I'm currently working with a mom whose son was killed in a training accident. They train heavy and hard so that they understand combat experiences. And so it's very, very dangerous in the training space. I work with an organization called Gallant Few, and they work with military veterans. They have an incredible coaching program to help military veterans particularly stay involved in the military community and in that healthy and happy space so that we can slow down military suicides. And then lastly, and a pretty exciting one, is with a group called Combat Flags. And Combat Flags, after you've served, you end up with lots and lots of uniforms. You can donate them to Dan at Combat Flags, and he makes small flags that carry the story of the serviceman or woman who wore that uniform, and he raises money for Stop Soldier Suicide. So it's an excellent organization. So I wanted to introduce you to those three groups. A lot of people ask me, what can I do? And you can pray, and you can donate money to those groups that are helping our veterans who really deserve our help after all that they've given. Okay, that's 16 minutes, which means I have like 4 to 10 left. I love to open the floor, and I can answer any questions that you may have. I'm happy to. We do have a memorial fund for Josh through the Illinois Prairie Community Foundation, and all monies that are collected or donated go back into Bloomington Normal Youth Sports. I'm absolutely convinced that youth sports are what equipped Josh to go serve in our military, and so we do everything we can to give back. It's a little bit hard this year since baseball. It is happening. We typically underwrite the Memorial Day tournament out at the Pony Fields. That didn't happen this year, but we also support several scholarships through Cougar football and give back to other sports where we can. So any questions that anyone has? Don't be afraid.
I'll just by saying, wow, had no idea. So don't know that there's a question in there, but thanks for sharing the story. No idea.
Absolutely.
Comparing it to the movies, and I have a tendency to watch a lot of movies, and some of those I stray away from because it's difficult to watch, but comparing it to that is enlightening.
Yeah, we've met the wonderful with that. So much like the movies, after Josh and Cameron were killed, they called in an airstrike. And so the F-16 fighter jets flying over very close. Now, very close in military terms and very close in our terms is almost hysterical, really, because I now ask every question. The men that Josh served with are like my boys. So, Josh did die, and he's in the arms of God, in the arms of Jesus until he can be in my arms again. God then gave me about 27 other men to wrap my arms around, because the men Josh served with are like my sons. And so I asked them about the experience, and they can tell me so much. A lot of it's still confidential. But he said they talked about calling in the airstrike for extra support after Josh and Cam were killed. And, they said they were really, really close enough that the ground shook. They all suffered hearing issues after they got back because of the ground, because it was so close, what they called danger close. And they dropped 3 bombs at that time, so precise that they destroyed the compound, but none of our people were hurt. And so it's so precise where they dropped those bombs. Now, danger close. So I said, oh my gosh, could you look up? Was it like you could look up and touch the plane? Because in my head, if you say a plane flew so close, that's what I'm thinking, right? You could not see the plane from the ground. And so that's how high up the plane was. They were like, no, you can't see it. So the F-16 fighter jet is so high you can't see it, and yet drops a bomb so precisely that it can destroy one building and simply shake the one that the guys are on so violently that they suffer hearing loss. We later met that fighter pilot, and so he actually found us. I am active on social media so that people can find us. And so he found us. We met the 2 fighter pilots from that night, got to shake their hands and hug their necks. They received the highest honor you can get in the Air Force for activities that night. And then one of Josh's, Josh's actually boss, I guess you could call him, also received the 2nd highest award that you can receive in the military for actions that night. And so, this reminded me when you said comparing it to the show, because all I can think of is like Rambo or something, because Michael actually single-handedly cleared the space so the 9-line helicopter could come in and take Josh and Cameron out. It actually took about 40 minutes before the airstrike, and then they could clear enough to be safe enough to take them out. And even then, the helicopter pilot was having to fire so that they could get them on the helicopter. It happened that night. The entire combat activity lasted about 3.5 hours. And so the guys were out there for a long time, but again, it was successful. That's happening today in our world.
Vonda, again, go ahead, Rick.
I just want to say thank you for taking what, as a parent is the worst thing I can possibly think of, losing a child, and channeling your efforts so very, very positively towards getting people to understand what's happening. That's amazing, Vonda.
Thank you.
I thank you so much for the story, Vonda. I know we're going to take it with us all day today, if not beyond. But I smiled when you were talking about Josh as a high schooler, and you said you'd never have pegged him for a hero. In looking for a Father's Day quote to share this morning, I ended up with Ken Norton, that I didn't do because I wasn't sure it was appropriate, and now I know that it is. Was one from Wally Schirra Sr., the father of the astronaut who was killed in the line of duty. He said, "You don't raise heroes, you raise sons. And if you treat them like sons, they'll turn out to be heroes."
That's
you did
beautiful.
a great job, obviously.
Thank you. Thank you.
And still doing a great job.
Thank you. In the military has a pretty infamous, I guess you could say, saying, and that's that a soldier dies twice, once on the battlefield and once when their name stops being said. And so we started with, I mentioned that Josh is on several memorials, both nationally and locally. I forgot to mention the Iron Warrior Memorial we have out at the high school that the kids tap when they run out to the football field. And the point of those memorials is a moment of silence, and then it should be very noisy. at military memorials. And the reason for that is because the moment of silence is to pay respect. The noise comes from saying their names. So what I would ask you to do is anytime you see a military memorial with names, that you take a moment and read them out loud and say them out loud. Now, I won't challenge you to say them all out loud because I don't expect you to, hang out at the memorial that long, but take a few minutes, say a few names out loud. That's really, really important for both Gold Star families and the men that served with them.
That is a great takeaway. That is great.
Thank you for letting me share a story. There is nothing that brings me actually more joy than the opportunity to introduce people to Josh, take a minute to brag on my Ranger boys, and just open your eyes a little bit to what's going on. Thanks so
Thank
much.
you so much for sharing.
Vonda, thank you so much for sharing
Thank you.
Thank you.
and
Thank
your
you.
sacrifice.
Best to Kevin.
Thank you. Thank you.
I'll go on to share that Vonda was a recommendation from a fellow Rotarian, and we all know people in our lives that have amazing stories. And so I'll challenge each of you. I was lucky enough to have the recommendation of Vonda speaking with us, and we all know people that have some interesting stories, some neat things that they all do, and it's neat to hear those. It brings us up, so to speak, and. So always great to have speakers that provide an impact in our lives. So thank you again.
Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you very much, Vonda, again. I really appreciate you joining us and sharing the story. And wow, I don't know how to express that. It was really nice to hear from you. So
Thank you.
all right. So
It was wonderful to meet you guys.
all right.
You as well.
Likewise.
Yeah. Everybody,
Wow.
unmute yourself and join me for the starting of the four-way test. All the things we think, say, or do. Is it the truth?
Is it the
Truth,
truth?
Spiritual
Is it
concern,
fair
or
to all
concern,
concerned?
will
Will
goodwill, and
build
better
better
friendships?
friendships?
Will be
Beneficial to all concerned.
Thank you all.
We have Jay Tetzloff next week, Bloomington Parks and Recreation, for sure.